right, this is Board and Savior. I'm Ben. Welcome back. I paint minis. Let's take it back to the beginning. I first started painting miniatures in 2018, apparently, according to these pictures from 2018. These photos are the only evidence that I have of these first few miniatures. It's tough to tell, but suffice it to say, they didn't look great. I was using apple barrel acrylic craft paint that you get at Walmart for like 59 cents. I was only sporadically priming the miniatures, and I was applying one color to any given section. No shades, no highlights, none of that. I have since sold the game that these minis were from, and I spray painted over my poor job so that they would go to their new home looking moderately okay, but probably a little bit chunkier than the other minis. I wasn't really thinning my paints, after all. In 2019, I started working at a game store near where I went to school, and it was there that I learned about kind of painting minis properly. Up to that point, I had figured painting minis just wasn't really for me because I hadn't done it perfectly the first few times that I tried. That's kind of a common issue for me, but don't worry about it. I'm working on it in therapy. That said, as I hung around people who played miniatures games instead of just regular board games, I saw a lot of miniatures of all sorts of paint qualities. Some were gray plastic, some were painted professionally, and others were painted for fun, even if the results weren't going to be nominated for a Golden Demon. One of the games that caught my attention was Blood Bowl. I am a football enjoyer, go Bills, and so I saved up my money and I bought a copy of the base game with my employee discount, of course. By this point, I had figured out that apple barrel paints weren't quite ideal for miniature painting, so I also picked up a few shades of Citadel paints. I still didn't know much, but I knew that a recipe for relatively good-looking miniatures in a relatively quick amount of time was to paint base colors, then wash the miniature with a dark wash like Nuln Oil or Agrax Earthshade, and then to dry brush a lighter color over top. That way you'll have shadows, midtones, and highlights done, even if it leaves you with a little less control than some other techniques. Now that I'm a few years removed from these, I can definitely see a lot of things that I wish I had done differently, but I think it's important to have all the stages of your painting journey. I mean, you gotta start somewhere. Here's what I'm seeing as I look at these. First, I didn't do anything with the bases. Now I find basing to be a lot of fun, so that's kind of a missed opportunity for me. You can also see, if you look closely, that a lot of these minis have lost some paint on edges and various parts of their tiny little bodies. That's because I didn't know that you were supposed to do anything after you finished painting. I just tossed them back in the Blood Bowl box and called it a day. Color-wise, they're also just pretty boring. I mean, it's a lot of red, or it's a lot of purple. I remember trying to break this up by including those steel and gold bits, but now it all just looks pretty samey. That's another thing that I've found in my journey. It's not as much fun when I paint miniatures that all look the same. That is a problem that I had again painting Star Wars Legion miniatures. After Blood Bowl, I looked through the games in my collection for miniatures that were just demanding to be painted. One game stood out. Not Blood Bowl, Blood Rage. Along with a bunch of great-looking warriors for the various player factions, the game came with a quartet of terrifying beasties. I remember thinking so highly of these paint jobs when I finished with them, and for good reason. At that point, they were definitely the best things that I had ever painted. I loved how much bigger they were than other minis that I had tackled. That really helped me paint details that would have been too nerve-wracking to do on smaller figures. While these four don't represent the quality that I strive for now, they were a big step in making me feel more confident painting, and they were a driving reason for my desire to keep going. Seeing these guys go from gray to full color was a really inspiring experience. After Blood Rage, I met my one true love, Sarastro. And by met, I mean that I found his YouTube channel while I was looking for inspiration for my next project. I knew that I liked painting bigger minis, and my other big mini in my collection was the AT-ST from Star Wars Imperial Assault. Brief aside, early on in my painting days, I felt self-conscious about relying on videos or tutorials or painting guides to help make my minis look good. I felt like I should just look up a few pictures online and then make all other decisions myself. Why? Why does that seem like a good idea? Why impose that upon yourself? So, I say to anyone out there who feels like they can't or shouldn't seek help from professional painters, it's okay. As soon as I found Sarastro and other painters like him, I also like Epic Duck Studios and Deathwatch Studios, as soon as I found them, my minis started looking better. Why? Because, yeah, they had something to teach me. Anyway, I painted these Imperial Assault minis following Sarastro's tutorials like the gospel, and I think they all look like a significant step up from the Blood Rage and Blood Bowl outings. And this guy. That said, even though I was happy with the quality, I found myself unhappy with the process. Painting took an insanely long time for me because these minis are particularly small and I have particularly shaky hands. I would try to paint the Stormtroopers' eyepieces and mess up and correct and try again and mess up again. I was determined to get the little details to a standard that I could live with, but it took forever. And that was when I learned about Star Wars Legion. I spent so much money on Legion. Personally, I don't care about the Star Wars prequels, so when I started getting into Legion, I knew I didn't need any clones or droids. The only mini I got from that era is Darth Maul, and I only got him because he's very, 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 very cool. Even so, with only the Rebels and the Empire to collect, Fantasy Flight and later Atomic Mass games require a lot of money in order to fill your home with their Legion minis. And over the course of a year, I gladly paid. I'm not caught up with the releases anymore, but there was a time when I owned every single Rebel and Imperial unit that there was to own, with the exception of the E-Web Blaster, because I read online that that one sucked. This is supposed to be a video about my painting journey, and instead it's becoming about my hoarder mentality, so let's get back on track. I own a lot of Legion minis, but don't worry, I painted all of them. No. And I don't want to find out what the percentage is, even though I could count and figure it out. So I'll just give you a rough estimate, and I'll say that it's probably about 40% of the Legion minis that I own are painted, and the rest are gray. So let's take a look at the ones that I have painted. We've got Stormtroopers, Rebels, and Tauntauns. Oh my! I think that by the time I started painting Legion minis, I had hit my stride. I am completely aware that these could all look better, but I think this level of quality is just about my personal cap, and I'm pretty happy with these results. Some look better than others, but for the most part, I'm proud of all my Legion fellas. The ones that really stand out to me as my favorites are R2-D2 and C-3PO. These guys have always been such a beautiful duo, and these two may be my favorite gray plastic to painted up journey. Both of them are simple. R2-D2 is just white and blue, C-3PO is just gold, but seeing them in color and next to each other makes me really happy. Boba Fett. I knew I needed to give him special attention when I got a third-party rocket smoke stand ordered from Deadly Print Studios, along with the little blaster bolts that you've seen on some minis. I'm not a huge fan of Boba in general. In fact, I prefer the little bursting balls to the tapioca pearls, but I've always dug his look. And Bosk. Again, I don't really care about Bosk, but yellow is so tough to paint that this dude is one of the longest times I have ever spent on a miniature. And I just love how he turned out. I watched a whole season of Better Call Saul painting this guy. He's always going to be in my heart. Okay, now I'm just going to talk about something else for a second, because there are a few more minis that I wanted to show off from my Legion days. I mean, I painted so many, so damn it, I want them to be seen. Let's chat about board game prices. They're so expensive! And I know, yeah, miniatures cost money, and I know everything is more expensive, but I feel like the prices just shot up when I wasn't looking, and everyone just kind of agreed to it. When I started my collection, I was getting games like Innis and Cyclades and Kemet for like $50, $60. The Kickstarter for the Cyclades remake was asking for $100. I mean, I'm sure the minis are nicer, but how much nicer? And I know that's the whole Kickstarter thing, but it still saddens me. You used to be able to get games with a few good minis for like $70, and now everything is $100 or more. It's almost like capitalism is bad. Anyway, the last thing I have to talk to you about is Marvel Crisis Protocol, my latest painting obsession. I like Marvel even more than I like Star Wars, and I like painting Marvel Crisis Protocol minis way more than I like painting Legion minis. Again, they're another step up in scale, but most importantly, their sculpts are just incredible. And don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic Legion sculpts too, but Marvel Crisis Protocol, it's on another level. I gotta say, even though these are the most recent miniatures that I've painted, they don't all share a cohesive look, at least not to me. I do things differently for each model. I threw some object source lighting in the mix for Red Skull. I tried glazing with the Hydra soldiers. Ms. Marvel has very little layering, while I tried to go hard on layering Hawkeye. Doc Ock looks kind of dirty, while Captain America looks more clean. Honestly, I don't love that move. I do love it when I see a group shot of someone's Marvel figures and they all share a style. But I don't know, I'm starting to become okay with it. I think it's important to experiment and learn what works for you and what doesn't. I mean, I think these Hydra soldiers look pretty good, but I don't think they look good enough for the amount of time that it took for me to glaze. Besides, if I was going to pick anywhere to experiment with different styles and ideas, comic book characters are really the perfect medium. As a reader, you get used to seeing some issues drawn by Alex Ross and others by John Romita Jr. Of these, I am particularly proud of Daredevil and the Daily Bugle. I didn't follow a tutorial for either, and both came out looking truly just as I pictured them. So, what are the important takeaways from my mini painting journey? First, I think you gotta start where you start. Don't try to skip over the learning stages because it's not gonna work. Unless you're a prodigy or something, your first mini is probably not gonna look that great, and that's okay. Watch tutorials and painting guides. Pay attention to the order in which they do things and figure out why they chose to do it in that order. Someone on Reddit once cautioned me against recommending Sarastro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting guides to new painters, and I say, don't listen to that guy. Those guides are going to be way too complicated for you. They are way too complicated for me. But I think watching people do your hobby better than you can do your hobby is inspirational, and you are guaranteed to learn some things. Maybe you won't be able to replicate his freakishly beautiful object source lighting until you've painted for 5 years, but you're going to know how he does it, and you'll have something to strive for. Plus, I can't tell you how many times I did something accidentally awesome while painting. Sometimes it would take me 50 tries to paint the whites of someone's eyes correctly. Other times, I would nail it on the first try. You're never going to get a beautiful object source lighting effect if you don't try. That's the last thing. Try. If you're like me, you're painting because you find it enjoyable and relaxing, so mess around. Have fun. The good news is, if you hate what you tried, you're actually allowed to paint over it. You can cover up your attempt at non-metallic metal that didn't work out, but it doesn't take away the fact that you practiced it. And maybe next time, because you practiced it this time, it'll be better. So there you have it. My painting journey. I know this wasn't a board game review or discussion, so please let me know in the comments whether this is something that you're interested in seeing. Do you like hearing me just talk to you without doing little bits or jokes? Do you want to learn more about painting, about how I paint? Do you want to see me paint something? You have the power to guide this channel. Use it wisely. Well, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next week with gameplay, and I'll see you the week after on Halloween with something spooky. Okay, bye!